Speak to misinformation expert Dr. Sander van der Linden, who is Professor of Psychology at Cambridge University, author of Foolproof: While We Fall for Misinformation and How to Build Immunity. Professor, thank you very much for talking to us. And I wondered, is the threat of misinformation and its effect on our behaviour becoming even greater?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Certainly, I think the threat of election misinformation is real. We're not only talking about trying to change people's vote, which can be difficult, especially, because most voters in the US are partisan, but it can have other effects. Some people become confused. We know from psychological research that when people think that the election is fraudulent or, there are problems with the integrity of the election, people are less likely to vote. They disengage from the democratic process, and that can in itself undermine elections too. And so, aside from the direct threat of influencing people's vote, there's also the potential for larger confusion, which can put people off from the entire process.
I'm really fascinated by what you say about a lie founded in a little reality becoming something that can be expanded to be a generalization. For example, as you say, one or two instances of voter fraud, then being widened out as in the whole system is corrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what producers of misinformation do is they look for the things that sound minimally persuasive to people so that they can build on it. So, for example, the conspiracies that the voting machines are secretly changing people's votes sounds kind of ridiculous. So that's not going to get the most traction. But if you take a real example of, hey, there's been one person who's voted twice or who's been arrested or being investigated for trying to cast multiple votes, they're taking that anecdote and then blowing it up into a conspiracy that the whole thing is rigged. While in fact, this only means that the system is working. They're spotting, amongst millions of people, they're spotting that one person who's not abiding by the rules. That's how good the system is. And they're trying to use that against people by coming up with unfounded conspiracy theories.
What sort of impact is that sort of misinformation having on voter numbers, in faith in the democratic systems, as far as you can tell?
Yeah, so it's very hard to study how these things influence people's votes, of course, how we feel about candidates, that all matters. But I think what disinformers try to do, because they know that, people's beliefs can be difficult to influence, and that's often why they wait until election day. So they try to target swing voters, undecided, people who are still, listening to different speeches, different, opinions. That's where they can get the most traction. So I think actually now we're sort of in the danger zone where most of the disinformation can come and actually confuse people in terms of how they're casting their ballot on the day of the election. And that's in addition to just, making people cynical about the whole process. We know from experiments, from research that, when people know that, or when people believe election fraud rumors, they're less likely to accept the result. And maybe I should add, the real risk, of course, is that if people think that the election was fraudulent, which, we're already seeing that in polling numbers, that Trump's base is starting to think that, if he doesn't win, it's likely to be fraud, that can actually turn violent. So, online conspiracy theories can turn into offline violence. We've seen that with the 2020 election and the Capitol insurrection. And so what we want to do is prevent that from happening again. I mean, if people believe that the election was fraudulent, there's a real risk of escalating violence.
The last couple of times around, as far as the US is concerned, everybody was looking at Russia as being behind a lot of the misinformation. Who's behind it now?
Yeah, so there are networked groups who try to sow confusion. Some of those networked groups, for example, they run Facebook groups, are domestic. But again, Russia is actively trying to interfere with this election. For example, there was a fake video in Georgia that was circulating where a Haitian immigrant supposedly admitted that he had voted multiple times to try to rig the election in favor of the Democratic Party. And that video turned out to be completely fake, and it's originated in Russia. So there you can see that Russia is still actively trying to influence the election. Research is trying to investigate to what extent that is successful. But I would say it's coming, from both domestic and foreign sources.
What about social media figures like Elon Musk, who have enormous numbers of followers, putting out some rather strange tweets before the election?
Yeah, strange is one way to put it. Yeah, so in the domestic bucket, we certainly have people like Elon Musk, and in fact, we use models from epidemiology to try to that are used for viruses to actually study how rumors spread online because it's the same type of diffusion process. And Elon Musk is an example of a super spreader, and in fact, a super spreader event because he's reaching over 200 million people, and he is constantly flooding the space with election denial, conspiracy theories, unfounded. In fact, election officials have said they can't keep up with debunking, and they're so distracted trying to debunk all of his misinformation and the reach that he has that I think it's become a real threat to the integrity of the election because he's not only the richest man in the world, but also he has a very big microphone.
Very, very briefly, if you will, I mean, as your book puts it, how do we build immunity to this?
Yeah, we can see how difficult debunking is because it's an uphill battle. And that's why we focus so much on this idea of pre-bunking and going out there and preemptively inoculating people against the most common election myths that they might come across online, pointing them to authoritative sources and election officials for the best information about how to vote. Because we already know that what they're trying to do is confuse people about how to vote, where to vote, and when to vote, and even your right to vote. So you want to vaccinate people in advance with that information so that that's secure and they won't be duped by these false conspiracy theories when they come across them online or when they're trying to cast their ballot. Of course, now we're very close to the end, and I've seen some movement in this direction of pre-bunking throughout the cycle, so that's been good. But I think now is the crucial time to go out and try to get ahead and preemptively try to inoculate people against these false conspiracy theories.
Dr. Sander van der Linden, thank you so much, Professor of Psychology at Cambridge University. There is live coverage